Daddy, am I really not your son?
Go to bed, Ethan. I'm having a conversation with your mommy.
Okay, Daddy.
He had built an empire with his bare hands, and in one evening, he burned down the only thing that ever mattered. Jun Hyuk stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, 63 floors above Seoul, watching the city lights flicker like dying stars below him. At 41, he had everything the world told a man to want: a net worth that made headlines, a company that employed over 40,000 people across 12 countries, a name that made boardrooms go quiet and competitors lose sleep. Forbes had called him the most formidable business mind of his generation. Business Weekly had placed him on their cover 3 years in a row. He had shaken hands with presidents, dined with royalty, and rebuilt an entire industry from the ground up. But when the elevator doors opened each evening, none of that mattered, because Ethan would come running. Every single night, no matter how late, no matter how exhausted he was, his 5-year-old son would hear the elevator chime and sprint across the marble floor in his little socks, arms stretched wide, face split open with the kind of joy that only exists in children who have never learned to hide their love. "Daddy, you're home! Daddy, you're home!" And Jun Hyuk, the man who had made grown men stutter and seasoned investors second-guess themselves, would drop his briefcase, crouch down, and catch that boy like he was the most valuable thing on earth. Because he was. He pressed his face into Ethan's neck and breathed him in, and for a few seconds, the weight of the empire fell away completely. Amara would appear from the kitchen or the study, wearing that quiet smile she had, the one that never demanded anything from him, the one that simply said, "I'm glad you're here." She was beautiful in the most real sense of the word, not the manufactured beauty of the women his colleagues paraded at galas, but something deeper and more permanent. She had warmth that filled rooms. She had patience that humbled him. She had chosen him when he was still building himself, still rough at the edges, still prone to silence and coldness, and she had stayed, not because of what he became, but because of who he tried to be when he was with her. They had met 8 years ago at an international design conference in Paris. She was a rising creative director, representing a Lagos-based luxury brand. He was there to scout partnerships. She had refused to be impressed by him, which was so unusual that he had followed her across 3 conference halls just to hear her speak again. 6 months of long-distance calls, 1 year of visits, a proposal in a quiet restaurant in Jeju, with no cameras and no performance. A wedding that his board members called too small, and that Amara called exactly right. And then Ethan. Ethan, who had Jun Hyuk's sharp jaw and Amara's warm eyes and a laugh that sounded like both of them at once. This was the life Jun Hyuk had. This was the thing he would destroy. He just didn't know it yet. Soo Jin had always believed she deserved more. She was 5 years older than Jun Hyuk, sharper in some ways, harder in all the ways that mattered less. She had worked beside him since the company's early days, grinding through the lean years, absorbing the same pressure, carrying the same name. When Jun Hyuk became CEO, she had accepted the role of vice chairwoman with a smile that was perfectly constructed and privately hollow. She told herself she was fine. She told herself the company's success was her success too. She told herself she didn't resent him. She lied to herself for a long time. But when Amara entered the picture, something in Soo Jin shifted into something darker. She watched her brother change, watched the coldness soften, watched him laugh more, sleep better, lose interest in the power games that had once been his oxygen. She watched Amara bring color into that penthouse and ease into his shoulders, and instead of being happy for him, she felt something close to rage. Because in her mind, Amara had taken something from her. Not the company. Not yet. But influence. Access. the invisible thread that had always connected Soo-jin to her brother's decisions. Amara had replaced her as his most trusted person without even trying, and that was the cruelest part. She hadn't schemed. She hadn't campaigned. She had just loved him, and it was enough. And then Ethan was born, and the math became unbearable. Ethan would inherit everything. The empire that Soo-jin had also bled for. The name she carried. The legacy she believed was as much hers as her brother's. And Ethan's mother was Amara, a woman Soo-jin had decided, without evidence and without shame, was a threat to everything she was owed. So she made a plan. It took her 4 months to find the right person, a hospital IT contractor with debt and a gambling problem and very little loyalty to anything but the next payment. It took another 3 weeks to access the right database. Ethan had been born at a private hospital, and at birth, a routine paternity registration had been filed, standard procedure for the hospital's records. The original DNA analysis sat in a locked digital file, accurate, unambiguous, and completely incriminating to her plan. She had it changed. The contractor altered the report with surgical precision. The language was official. The formatting was identical to the original. The conclusion was devastating. Probability of paternity, 0%. Soo-jin read the document 3 times and felt something she was ashamed to call satisfaction. She printed it. She anonymized it. She sent it to Jun Hyuk's private email with a subject line that read only, "You should know the truth." She pressed send on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday evening, her brother's world had ended. Jun Hyuk had been in a pre-announcement strategy meeting when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. His assistant knew not to interrupt strategy sessions unless the building was on fire. But the email came from an address he didn't recognize, and something in him, some instinct older than logic, made him open it under the table. He read the subject line first. "You should know the truth." He opened the document. He read the first paragraph, then stopped, then read it again, then read the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room kept talking around him. Someone was explaining quarterly projections. Someone else was arguing about market entry timing. Jun Hyuk heard none of it. He was looking at a number that his mind refused to process. 0%. He set his phone face down on the table with a calm that was not calm at all, but the particular stillness of a man whose entire nervous system has just seized. He excused himself. He walked to the executive bathroom. He stood at the sink and looked at his own face in the mirror for a long time. Then he took out his phone and read the report again, as if a second reading would change the conclusion. It didn't. He thought about Amara. He thought about the pregnancy, the 9 months she had been radiant and tired and happy, the way she had reached for his hand during the ultrasound, the way she had cried when Ethan was placed in her arms, and then looked up at him and said, "He looks like you, doesn't he?" He had been so sure in that moment, so completely certain of everything. Now certainty was gone, and in its place was something ancient and corrosive. Pride, not grief, not confusion. Pride. The pride of a man who had never been made to look foolish, who had built his entire identity on being smarter than the room, sharper than his opponents, impossible to deceive. And if this report was true, if it was true, then he had been deceived by the one person he had trusted without reservation. He told himself he needed to be rational. He told himself there were questions to ask. But the pride was louder than rationality. He went home. Amara knew immediately that something was wrong. She had always been able to read him. It was one of the things that used to make him feel known, and now made him feel exposed. She came out of the study where she had been working on a branding proposal, and she looked at his face, and she said, "What happened?" He didn't answer. He walked to the dining table and dropped the printed document in front of her. She looked down at it. She picked it up. She read it. And Jun Hyuk watched her face for guilt, for flinching, for any crack in her expression that would confirm what he already believed. What he saw instead was confusion. Genuine, unperformed confusion. "What is this?" she said. "You tell me." His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than shouting. Jun Hyuk, I don't understand. Where did this come from?" "Does it matter where it came from? Does the source change what it says?" She put the paper down carefully. Yes, it absolutely matters where it came from, because this is wrong. This is not true. Ethan is your son. You know, that. "I don't know anything." He heard his own voice and barely recognized it. "I thought I knew you." "You do know me." She stepped toward him, and he stepped back, and the distance that opened between them in that single motion was catastrophic. "Jun Hyuk, look at me. Look at me, please. This test is wrong. There's never been anyone else. Ever. Not once. Not even a moment." "Then explain the report." "I can't explain it because I don't know where it came from. But it is wrong. We can do another test. We can go tomorrow. First thing. Any hospital you choose. I don't need another test." And there it was. The sentence that would haunt him for years. "I don't need another test, Amara. I need you to stop lying to me." The room went silent, and then a small voice came from the hallway. "Mommy?" They both turned. Ethan was standing at the edge of the living room in his pajamas, holding the stuffed bear he had named Captain, rubbing his eye with one fist. He had been woken, probably, by the tension more than the volume. Children are like that. They feel the atmosphere of a room before they understand the words. He looked at his mother. He looked at his father. And something in his small face tightened, the way children's faces do when they sense disaster, but haven't been given the language for it yet. "Why are you crying, Mommy?" he asked. Amara turned away and covered her face. Jun Hyuk looked at his son, at the boy's jaw, at his hands, at the way he held his body with the exact same tension Jun Hyuk himself carried. And for 1 second, one terrible second, doubt flickered. Not doubt about the test, doubt about what he was doing. He pushed the doubt down. "Go back to bed, Ethan," he said. "But Daddy, go back to bed." Ethan didn't move immediately. He looked at his father with those eyes, Amara's eyes, wide and dark and full of something that was almost understanding. And he said, in the small, careful voice of a child who is trying very hard to say the right thing, "Are you mad at me?" "No," Jun Hyuk said. "I'm not mad at you." "Are you mad at Mommy?" No answer. Ethan's chin trembled. "Daddy, am I really not your son?" The question cracked something open in the room. Amara made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Jun Hyuk stood absolutely still, and the silence he gave his son in that moment was a cruelty he would spend years trying to undo. "Go to bed," he said again. Ethan went. The divorce was fast and brutal in the way that only rich men's divorces can be. Weaponized with lawyers and leaked to the press before the ink was dry on the first filing. Jun Hyuk's legal team was efficient and merciless, which was exactly what he had always paid them to be. He just had never imagined he would deploy them against his own wife. The media did what media does. Korean billionaire CEO files for divorce. Wife accused of betrayal. Amara Jun, the woman who deceived an empire. Sources close to Jun Hyuk confirm the child may not be his. She became a villain in a story she hadn't been given the chance to tell. The internet dissected her, her origin, her looks, her career, every public appearance she had ever made beside her husband. Strangers who had never met her delivered verdicts with total confidence. The comment sections were vicious in the specific way that comment sections always are when a woman is accused of something that plays into existing suspicions about women who marry wealthy men. Amara did not respond publicly. Her lawyer advised her to stay quiet, and she agreed, not only because of the strategy, but because she didn't know what she would say. She was still in shock, not the shocked and guilty kind, but the shocked and disoriented kind of someone who has been hit by something they never saw coming and cannot yet locate the source. She packed what was hers. She took Ethan's things, his clothes, his drawings, his Captain the Bear. She took the few things that were unambiguously, inarguably her own. On the last morning, Ethan walked to his father's study. Jun Hyuk was at his desk, pretending to review documents he wasn't reading. He heard Ethan's footsteps. He had memorized those footsteps. He had never noticed that he had memorized them. And he looked up. Ethan was holding his favorite drawing. He had drawn it 3 weeks earlier, 3 figures in crayon, labeled in his shaky kindergarten handwriting. Daddy, Mommy, me. The 3 figures were holding hands. They were all smiling enormous crayon smiles. He placed it on the desk in front of Jun Hyuk. I made this for you, he said, so you don't forget me. Jun Hyuk could not speak. I still love you, Daddy, Ethan said, even if you're not sure about me. Then he turned and walked back to his mother. They left. And Jun Hyuk sat in his study with a crayon drawing in front of him and finally understood, in the fullest and most devastating sense, what he had just done. But understanding did not undo it. The months that followed were a masterclass in successful misery. The company exceeded quarterly targets. 3 new international partnerships were announced. A major acquisition went through. The board was pleased. Jun Hyuk received congratulations via email and handshakes at events and glowing features in business publications. By every external metric, he was thriving. His penthouse had never been quieter. He tried to fill it in the way men like him fill things, with work, with strategy meetings that ran past midnight, with business travel that kept him in transit 3 weeks out of 4. He rediscovered the version of himself that existed before Amara, the cold and driven and efficient version, and he wore it like armor and told himself it was progress. But he couldn't enter Ethan's room. He had left it exactly as it was, the toy chest still open, the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling, the small bookshelf with the picture books Amara had read aloud every night, doing different voices for each character, making Ethan shriek with laughter. Jun Hyuk would stand in the doorway sometimes, late at night, when the rest of the apartment was achingly silent, and look at the room and feel something that had no name, because he had spent his whole life refusing to learn the names of his most inconvenient feelings. He kept the crayon drawing in his desk drawer. He told himself he didn't look at it. He looked at it often. At the company, Soo-jin had settled into a quiet and terrible satisfaction. She was more present in board meetings, more vocal about strategic direction. She had begun positioning herself with key stakeholders, building alliances, establishing credibility as a steadying force in what she presented as a time of personal instability for her brother. She was careful. She was patient. She smiled at Jun Hyuk at family dinners with the rehearsed warmth of someone who has buried their guilt so deep it has begun to petrify. But she had been careless in one crucial moment. The IT contractor she had used, the man with the debt and the gambling problem, had kept a record, not out of conscience, out of leverage. He had kept a record the way people who operate in moral gray zones always keep records, as insurance, as a future bargaining chip, as proof that he hadn't done it alone. And when his financial situation deteriorated further, when the gambling debt became a different kind of debt, with less patient creditors, he made a mistake of his own. He accessed the hospital system again, clumsily, from a device that was traceable, trying to see if there was anything else worth selling. The hospital's security protocols flagged the anomaly. Their IT security team investigated. They found the original access records from 4 months earlier. They found the data alteration. They found the file that had been changed. And because the file in question was attached to the record of a minor child whose father was one of the most prominent businessmen in the country, the hospital director made a decision. He called Jun Hyuk's office directly. Jun Hyuk almost didn't take the call. He was in the middle of a negotiation call with a European partner, and his assistant had been instructed to hold everything. But the hospital director had been insistent, and his assistant's voice had a quality on the intercom that made Jun Hyuk pause the call and pick up. "Mr. Jun," the director said, "I apologize for the intrusion, but I have information regarding your son's medical record that I believe requires your immediate attention." Jun Hyuk's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of information?" "The kind that is better discussed in person." He was at the hospital within the hour. The director laid everything out on the conference room table. The security logs, the timestamp of the original alteration, the analysis comparison, the real report versus the manipulated one. The original report, recovered from a backup server, unaltered, undeniable. The original report that showed a paternity match, a complete, unambiguous 99.97% paternity match. "The document you received," the director said carefully, "was not the original report. Someone accessed our system and altered the data before forwarding it to you anonymously." Jun Hyuk looked at the original report for a long time. Then he looked at the manipulated version. Then he looked at the director. "Who?" he said. The word came out barely above a whisper, but the force behind it was enormous. "We have the access records," the director said. He slid a document across the table. "The account used to access the system was a contractor, but the contractor has been cooperating with our investigation. He says he was hired." He paused. "He has named the person who hired him." Jun Hyuk looked at the name on the document. He read it twice. He set the paper down. He said nothing for a very long time. "Mr. Jun," the director said quietly, "are you all right?" Jun Hyuk stood up. "Thank you," he said, with a composure that was clearly costing him everything. "I'll need copies of all of this." He drove back to the office. He went directly to Soo-jin's floor. She was in her office when he arrived. She looked up when he opened the door, and something crossed her face. Surprise first, and then, beneath it, the faintest recognition. The kind of recognition that looks like guilt before guilt has been confirmed. "Jun Hyuk," she said, "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything—" He closed the door behind him. He crossed the room and placed the hospital documents on her desk. She looked down at them. She looked back up at him. "I've just come from the hospital," he said. "I'd like you to tell me, in your own words, what you did. Not because I need the confession. I have the records. I have the contractor's statement. I have more than enough. But because I'd like to understand. I'd like to hear it from you. I'd like to look at my sister and understand how we arrived here." Soo-jin was quiet for a moment. Then she sat back in her chair with the measured composure of someone who has already rehearsed this moment in their worst nightmares. "I did it to protect the company," she said. Jun Hyuk stared at her. "Say that again." "She was wrong for you. You were changing, Jun Hyuk. You were becoming someone who made decisions based on emotion. That woman had too much influence over you. And the boy, Ethan, would inherit everything. Everything we both built. I couldn't let an outsider—" "Stop!" His voice was very low. "Stop talking about protecting the company. I was trying to—" "You destroyed my family." His voice didn't rise. It dropped further, which was somehow far more frightening. "You looked at my son, a 5-year-old child who called you auntie, who drew pictures for you, who ran to hug you every time you came to the house, and you decided he was a threat. You looked at my wife, who had done nothing to you, nothing, and you decided she deserved to be destroyed. And then you sat at my dinner table and smiled at me for months while I walked around in agony, believing I had been betrayed by the one person I trusted most. Soo Jin opened her mouth. "Don't," he said. "Don't tell me it was about the company. The company is not a living thing. It doesn't feel. It doesn't need to be protected from love. You did this because you were jealous. Because Amara gave me something you couldn't take credit for. And you couldn't stand it." Soo Jin looked away. There was something on her face now that was not quite guilt, but was the closest thing to it she was capable of. A shifting, a rearranging, as if certain foundations beneath her certainty were starting to crack. "You wanted to protect the company," Jun Hyuk said, and his voice had gone completely flat. "The company will survive. It survived before Amara, and it will survive after you. But my son spent months believing his father didn't want him. Do you understand what that does to a child? Do you understand what it means for a 5-year-old boy to look at the person who is supposed to be his whole world and receive silence? He asked me if I still wanted him. He asked me that. And He stopped. He looked at his sister for a long time. "You're done here," he said. "As of today." He walked out. Finding Amara was not difficult. He had never, in the deepest and most private part of him, stopped tracking the high fact of her existence in the world. He knew she had left Seoul. He knew she had relocated. He had a private investigator's report sitting in a folder he had opened and closed many times without reading past the first page, because reading it felt like a kind of weakness he wasn't ready for. He read it now. She had moved to a mid-sized city, rented an apartment, and within 6 months of leaving him, had established a small creative design studio. The studio had been doing well. She had clients. She had hired 2 staff members. She was, by every available indicator, building something of her own from scratch, with no access to his money and no use of his name. He had not expected anything less from her. He drove. He didn't call ahead. He had debated calling ahead and decided against it because she would tell him not to come, and she would be right to, and he would go anyway. And arriving unannounced at least spared both of them that particular phone call. He found the studio on a quiet commercial street with potted plants on the front step and a small hand-painted sign that bore a name he didn't recognize. She had not used her married name. He stood outside for longer than he would admit, organizing himself, or trying to. He had faced hostile takeovers and hostile boards and hostile press, and none of it had required the specific kind of courage that the next few minutes were going to require. He went in. The receptionist looked up. "I'm here to see Amara," he said. The receptionist began the standard visitor protocol, and then looked at him more carefully and stopped. She made a phone call. She told him to wait. He waited. The door to the back office opened. Amara stepped out. He had been preparing himself for the sight of her, and it hadn't been enough. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, a pencil still in her hand from whatever she had been working on when the receptionist called. She looked well. She looked, he realized, with a complicated mix of relief and sorrow, genuinely well. Not the performance of wellness, not the curated image of a woman determined to appear unbothered, but real health, real groundedness, the kind that comes from having been shattered and having done the work of putting yourself back together correctly. She stopped when she saw him. Her expression went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, followed by something that might have been fear, followed by the careful composure she had always been better at than him. "Jun Hyuk," she said. "Amara." He paused. "Can we talk?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. They went to her office. She sat behind her desk, which he recognized as a positioning choice. Professional distance, a surface between them, a boundary that was clear without needing to be stated. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood, and he looked at the space she had made for herself, The framed work on the walls, the organized desk, the small photo on the corner shelf. Ethan's school picture, in a simple frame. He looked away quickly. "I know," he said. "Before you say anything, I need you to know that I know. The hospital contacted me. They found evidence that the DNA report was altered. I know who did it." He paused. "I know it was wrong. Not just that the test was wrong. What I did was wrong. Everything. The way I came home that night, the things I said, what I chose to believe and what I chose not to believe." He stopped, started again. "I chose the report over you. I chose a piece of paper over everything we had built, everything you had given me, and I knew. Some part of me knew, but my pride was louder than everything else, and I let it be." Amara was looking at him without expression, not cold, just contained. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know those words are inadequate. I know sorry doesn't undo what Ethan experienced, what you experienced, the things that were written about you online, the things my team implied, the way your name was handled in the press. I know that saying sorry doesn't reach any of that, but I'm saying it because it's true, and because I need you to know that the man who did those things knew he was wrong before the truth was confirmed, and chose to continue anyway, and I will carry that." Silence. Then Amara said, "Do you know what hurt the most?" He looked at her. "Not that you left, not the lawyers, not the press." She set the pencil down on the desk. "The moment that broke me was when you looked at me that night and said you didn't need another test. Because that was the moment I understood that the problem was never really the report. The report was just a door that was already cracked open. And what I saw through it was that deep down, after everything, you still thought there was a version of me that could have done that to you. You still had that doubt." After 8 years, her voice was perfectly steady, which was somehow far more devastating than tears would have been. "I could have survived the accusation. I couldn't survive the discovery that you were always, somewhere, capable of believing it." June Hyuk had no answer for this. There was no answer. She was right, and being right is sometimes the thing that hurts everyone in the room equally. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said after a long silence. "I'm not here to ask you for anything. I came because I needed to tell you the truth, and because—" He stopped. Then, "Can I see him?" She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood and moved to the door. "Ethan," she called. "Can you come out here?" A door down the small hallway opened, and there he was. He had grown. Of course he had grown. Several months had passed, and children grow aggressively at 5. They grow like they're making up for something, like they know they're running behind schedule. He was taller. His face had sharpened slightly. He was wearing a school shirt, which meant Amara had brought him straight from pickup. He stepped into the doorway and looked at his father. June Hyuk looked back. He saw himself in that face. He had always seen himself in that face. And the fact that he had been capable, even briefly, even out of pride and pain, of turning away from something so obvious and so real, was the most damning thing he knew about himself. Ethan didn't run to him. He stood in the doorway and looked at his father with an expression that was careful in the way that only children who have been hurt learn to be careful. He was still deciding. June Hyuk crossed the room. He went down on one knee in front of his son. He brought himself to Ethan's level, and he looked at him. Really looked at him. The way he should have been looking all along, instead of looking at pieces of paper. "Ethan," he said. His voice wasn't steady. He didn't try to make it steady. "I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake, and you were the one who had to carry it. And that's not fair. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix it. But I am sorry. I am more sorry than I know how to say." Ethan watched him. He was chewing the inside of his cheek, which was something he did when he was thinking hard. You left, Ethan said. I did. You said, he stopped. You didn't say anything. That was the worst part. I asked you if you still wanted me, and you didn't say anything. Jun-hyuk closed his eyes briefly. I know. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was wrong, and I was too proud to admit it, and I hurt you because of it. That was wrong. I was wrong. Ethan was quiet again. Then he said, Do you still want me? Jun-hyuk didn't hesitate. Every day, he said. Every single day. There was not one day that I didn't want you. There was not one moment. I have your drawing in my desk, the one with the three of us holding hands. I have it in my desk, and I look at it more than I look at any of my business reports. Something shifted in Ethan's face. The carefulness didn't vanish. It would take more time for that, and they both instinctively knew it. But beneath it, something relaxed.